What does one say to an ancient Nephilim ghost?
I suppose you start with...
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
Hello, my friend. Stay a while and listen.
What's going on YouTube? It's Filthy and we're back with another video. I hope you enjoyed the server slam. It was a lot of fun playing these Diablo 4 characters up to level 20. I hope it has helped you maybe pick your starting class for when the game launches, which is, my god, only about 2 or 3 weeks away, so super pumped for it. Apologies on the lack of content lately. My technical problems have still been carrying on. I'm hoping that I'm over them, and we'll have some D4 videos on the docket to come. I do have a couple of D3 ones on the hard drive, so we'll try and get those busted out. But today's topic for discussion is, are the drop rates in Diablo 4 going to be too low? Are low drop rates a good thing? That's kind of what we're going to talk about. I've made some bullet points. I'm just going to chat through them. I would love to know your thoughts on this issue, and also I'd love to know your experience of the most recent beta. Now, I've been lucky enough to have the access to a couple of closed betas, stuff about Endgame and other previous versions. We've then had the early access beta for those who pre-ordered the game. We've then had the open beta for everybody, and then we've most recently had this server slam. Now, it is clear that the game is evolving across these various different betas, and the build of the game each time is changing. We can only really go off the latest one. I think that is much more likely to be a build that is much closer to the release version of the game, because it just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? We're going to stress the server, we're going to give people a kind of realistic build. So how the drop rates were in that beta is probably how they're going to be moving forwards. Now, I don't know about you, but I played probably some in the region of 15 to 20 hours, something like that, across the course of the weekend. I tried all of the classes. I didn't get them all to 20, but I got a couple of them there. I got them all over like level 15, 16. And in that time, in that entire 20 hours, I got a legendary off a Shava. I got a legendary in the cache from a Shava. And other than that, I found one legendary as a drop in like 15, 16, 17 hours of gameplay. We go back to the previous beta and the legendaries were much more common. It was much easier to build out the characters. And I think this is not just an experience for myself. I think from looking at the forums, from speaking to other people in Discord, so on and so forth, I think it does look like the rates of the drops have definitely gone down across the builds from the previous beta. So first off, we're going to make a case for why this is good. Then we're going to make a case for why this is potentially bad. And yeah, as I say, you can let me know in the comments whether you think that this is a good thing or not. Now, I didn't do any of the super ridiculous cheese of going to the level 30 area and clicking on a corpse to try and get it as a clickable to try and get legendaries to drop. I just thought that is such a waste of time. I would rather actually play the game, kill monsters and explore it. I don't think that's how 97% of the casual player base will behave. I didn't just farm the same zone over and over again. Again, I just wanted to have a look around and play all the classes. So I'm not saying that I've found the most number of items. You know, you could easily have spent my 20 hours differently and got way more legendaries if that was the only thing you cared about. But from 15 to 20 hours, just regular, normal gameplay, doing the story, walking around Sanctuary, I just didn't find any. So let's get into it. First good reason for low drop rates in an ARPG, value of rarity. So what does this mean? Well, the lower the drop rate, you're going to enhance the value, obviously, of finding something. Of course, always loot drops, you get that lovely beam. It's going to be meaningful. Now, when the legendaries rain from the sky, if you've got loot pinata, then obviously the effect of that is watered down. So Diablo 4 might well create a sense of excitement and accomplishment when you get that powerful weapon, when you get those pair of gloves with the legendary power on that you need to make your sorcerer build work, to make your rogue build work, or whatever. So in theory, because the drops are rarer, it just makes them more fun, it makes them more exciting, and it makes them more special. And I think there is something to that, definitely. That's definitely a plus point. I think importantly, it also maybe adds to the longevity of the game and also the end game content. So we know that D4's campaign is going to be somewhere in the region of 25-40 hours. It looks like a long one. I'm hoping it's going to be good. But at the end of that, you're then going to move over into the end game. And an ARPG, the cornerstone of it, always for me, is going to be loot. We will have the Paragon system. There will be things that we can change with the build, through that. But ultimately, finding gear is pretty much my jam. That's what I like. I'm a collector. I like finding items. I like making things. That's kind of how we go. Now, if you think about Diablo 3, if you come from that game, the most exciting part of the season is the first kind of like day and a half, couple of days. You're doing your season journey, you're getting your set bonus. Of course, set bonuses are a big criticism of D3, but just putting that to aside for a second, once you find all of your items, each time you find one, it's a big, feel-good moment. You're moving through the power, you're moving through the torment levels, and finding these gear pieces is really nice. And lots of people play, and it's quite busy in the first week of the season. After that, it becomes a little bit more like a ghost town because we're just chasing these very small incremental increases in gear. And I think that makes things pretty stale pretty quickly. Now, the way I personally cope with that in D3 is I go off and play all 7 classes. I go through that loot chase again. I roll myself a Crusader, a Wizard, Demon Hunter, Witch Doctor, whatever. And I go through that gear process again. But it still is very fast. And I think it's almost inarguable that if you really crunched the legendary drop rate down in Diablo 3, for instance, you would make that seasonal fun progress last a lot longer for me. So by having rarer loot, by having less legendaries drop at end game and through the course of the game, you're perhaps extending out the longevity of it. It's not necessarily content because it's not actually levels and things for you to do, but if you get things slower, then obviously you have to engage more with the end game content. So I think it potentially can be a good thing for that. And this really, I think, is kind of how I hope that the uniques work. I hope that they're quite rare, not ultra rare, but quite rare. And obviously we think that the uniques are going to be build defining, change skills, and again, if they're too easy to find, it's going to mess up the longevity. I think it's going to mess up the end game a little bit. Another encouraging thing for lower drop rates is it might actually get people to be a little bit more diverse with the skills that they use. Now, this could be leveling, it could be build making towards the end of the game, but the theory kind of is this, as in if you're playing the game and you're waiting for something to drop, a specific item for a specific build, and you're just ignoring everything else, that's kind of a bit pants. What I would like to happen is, let's say you're doing the Barbarian, you get a Hammer of the Ancients drop, it's something that buffs that skill, makes it do something cool or different or whatever. You're then going to use that, you're going to respec your character and you're going to put it on. Maybe you find an upheaval item and you play that on your next playthrough. What I'm getting at is you build with what the game gives you, and it encourages you to try these different skills. One of the bugbears I think about Diablo 3 really is you kind of, there's always that one best set for a class. The balance in that game is not very good, and ultimately everybody just ends up playing the same thing. You get your sets so easy, you get your massive multiplier, and off you go. And I think actually a far more fun way of playing our ARPGs is you build around what the game gives you, and you start off and you might think, well, I'm going to make this barb and I want to play Whirlwind. And fine, at the end of the game, that's where you want to be. After you engage in the content and the levels long enough to get all the pieces, then that's cool. But as you're going, I just think it's much more interesting and much more dynamic if the drops are rarer, but you find something that buffs a different skill. So each playthrough of a character on a season is going to be a little bit different because of this rarity of drops. Now, we do also need to bear in mind that the rare item drops isn't going to be like quite the bottleneck that it maybe appears, because we do know we've got the dungeon system whereby you go in, you beat the dungeon, you get the aspect, and that aspect can then be slapped onto another piece of gear at the occultist. So this will kind of offset a little bit the lower drop rate because you'll be able to target farm those. And I think actually this is potentially quite a nice little slow burner way of building a character. You're going to level up, you're going to find a few items that are going to be rare, you're going to be able to use the dungeon system to your advantage. So all in all, I personally think that the low drop rates, maybe I'm leaning more towards, I think they're a good thing. And finally, I guess really it's going to give you a little bit of an enhanced sense of progression, isn't it? Because if it's harder to find things, I think there is that kind of like just sense of achievement that you've actually progressed your character to the point where you've found all the items. Again, going back to D3 as an example, if you're done finding items after like a couple of days and all you can find is better versions of that item, I think that sucks a little bit. I think it's much better for a game that if it takes you, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks to find all of the base pieces for your build, and after that you're looking for Paragon, Paragon boards, upgrades, unique items, and that sort of thing. Now, of course, low drop rates aren't all going to be plain sailing. They're not going to be for everybody. Some people will not like them, and ultimately, playing that much of the beta and not seeing one, I can understand that some people got frustrated, and I guess that's the first negative. People get too frustrated, they'll be demoralized, they'll just get frustrated and give up. Like, doing the same things over and over again in the game and not getting the reward, not having a guaranteed way of doing it, can lead to burnout, basically. Now, at the end of the game, once you've beaten the campaign, we are going to unlock the essentially terror zones from D2, and like it's called Helltide, I think. You'll be able to go to areas, you'll get more difficult monsters. Again, in endgame doing bounties, you'll be able to go to the Tree of Whispers, you'll be able to target farm things a little better. We of course have the gambling to target farm pieces. But ultimately, if people aren't getting drops, there's like a sweet spot, really, isn't there? If you don't give people any drops at all, then they're going to feel quite frustrated, and I think there was a little bit of a sense of that after the current beta. Another point is potentially like accessibility and inclusivity of builds. The dungeon system offsets this, but essentially, if it's really hard to find things, then you might never get the experience to play that build. Now, some people would argue that's a good thing. You should have these chase items that take many playthroughs of the game to find. I think that makes far more sense in an economy that can trade and you can swap them. I don't think it makes much sense in an economy where you can't swap things, because ultimately, I've played a lot of Diablo 2 Resurrected, not like a ton, but enough, and high runes in that game are really hard to find. Some of the items in there are very rare, and you could play for years and never see them. Personally, I think that's kind of crappy game design, because I think there should be like an expectation that after almost like, I don't know, some certain figure, whether it's 100 hours or 1,000 hours, somewhere in between, or lower or higher or whatever, you will have found almost every item in the game. Again, some people disagree. They'll think, well, it's actually really cool to have these 1 in 10,000 hour drops every so often. But again, if you can't trade them, I think that's not a great thing. You can also end up with a lack of player agency. So again, if you're really wanting to do a particular build and you can't get the legendary to drop, that again leads back into frustration, burnout, and giving up. Dungeon system, as I say, should be able to offset that. So again, we'll have to kind of see. But the main thing against the low drop rates that I can see is kind of what we saw a little bit on the beta, which is you get reduced like exploration and variety. Somebody finds the best way to find legendary items, like going onto a zone that's a higher difficulty or whatever, clicking these 3 things, reset the game. Go in, click the corpses, reset the game. Do this one area, beat all the monsters, get the chest, reset, do it again. I think that's bad. It's just going to be bad for the game. You don't want to have to force people to go off and do those things. Now, it's not technically forcing, because ultimately you can take the approach that I did over the base and just go and play YOLO and whatever. But ultimately, if there is one method of getting legendaries that is far superior to the others, that's just how modern video games work, and it's just where people are going to go. So overall, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I actually personally, I think, quite enjoyed the lower drop rates. I would have liked a few more legendary items because I didn't really get a chance to play around with any builds. None of my skills got buffed, which gives me a bit of a perspective to talk about the classes without finding items, which I guess is nice. But ultimately, it was a little bit weird. I thought that basically I got 1 drop across the entire weekend. Maybe that's just bad luck on my part. Maybe I should have spent more time on a particular character at 20. I'm not so sure. But as I say, let me know your thoughts. Do you like the sound of lower drop rates? Do you want them to be higher? How did you feel about the current beta? Excited to hear. I've been the Filthy Casual. I'll speak to you again real soon. Take it easy, guys. Peace.